okay. Some states retract that ballot that was sent in. Other states count it. Um, and that is just confusing. Um, it's not a situation that occurs frequently, but apparently it occurred at some point that someone felt there needed to be a clause in an election law in some states that require that. Are there other questions here? Let's see. Yeah, so the confirmation bias, um, what that's really you have to do is actively search out the information. Be skeptical. You know, um, it's sometimes hard, but track down the source of the information. This is something I don't really participate in a lot of social media anymore, mainly because I've seen the worst parts of it and it's just burned me out. But whenever I would see something, I would go and I would track down where the story is coming from, where the information behind it is being distributed by, and sometimes it may look like several different news organizations are reporting a story, but they're reporting really on other news stations reporting that story. And maybe if you dig all the way back, you may find that the source of that story was RT.com, which is Russia state media. They changed their name from Russia Today to RT.com a number of years ago, and they mix in true news, completely valid stories with propaganda and disinformation. So you have to go back and track that down before you spread it and say, okay, are there any other sources, or am I going to trust this one source because it aligns with what I believe? Okay, so there's re-asking the question, given the great election lie. That's just good. Yeah, so there's two, one from Denise and one from looks like Marianne. Is somebody trying to say something?
I wanted to ask if we could also put forth questions orally.
Oh yeah, that would actually be the best way, because it allows me to just answer them rather than having to read the question.
You mentioned 5 Ds. I think I got distract, divide, doubt. What are the other 2?
It's distract, divide, doubt, discourage, and I always forget the 5th one. Doubt, divide, distract, discourage, and
Direct, divide.
I'm sorry, I don't remember the 5th D. I'd have to look it up. But
no problem. Thank you.
It's similar sorts of things. The idea is that adversaries are trying to muddy the waters, to create conflict where maybe there isn't any real conflict, and that's a huge problem, because people are fighting over what the basic truths are. No one's going to be able to have a discussion.
I would like to, I was the one I'm the Denise who was kind of asking you the question again.
Sure.
Now that I can talk to you, specifically news outlets, I'm not just saying this to say it, because yes, I have watched them before, okay? Regardless of my political or personal feelings. Fox, Newsmax, Right Side Broadcasting all contributed to the great election lie, even though there are people who just thought legitimately there must have been some fraud, who were honest people, who were not necessarily partisan people. They just got caught up with, well, yes, this is it. It's right because all of these places can't be wrong. So the question I have for you is, where do we go? Not everyone, again, is on the right or far right or whatever you want to call it. They're just honest people who heard it over and over and over again. And I will quote an expression from my mother: if you tell a lie long enough, even the devil will believe it. Okay? So these people are honestly misled. So again, what do we do to counteract this narrative and increase our election confidence? Not so much just security and integrity, but even election confidence now. And then you talked about facts and, you know, going beyond that, your preference, et cetera. That's very good. However, when people submit alternative facts, and of course, that brought me back to Orwell. Yes, I'm a certain age, and I read those books, those dystopian novels, but it did bring me back to that. So the question I have for you, you are extremely intelligent and engineering, scientific. Where do we go from here? And then I'll be on mute the whole time.
Sure. Just to be open, yes, my degrees are in engineering. My wife has her doctorate in anthropology. And when we first met, she told me that engineers are horrible at social science. And I pay attention to my wife because she's even smarter than me. So we brought in to the Election Integrity Initiative sociologists, social psychologists, experts in, understanding bias and understanding people and understanding how to conduct surveys that eliminate the bias. And they were critical to have on the project. So to get back to what do we do about it, you have to have some trusted fact-checking sites, as well as some other types of sites. So Snopes.com, is one of the sites that has some stuff about the more outrageous claims. Look for sources that, this again goes back to my elementary school education, where, we talk about, source quality. There's a big difference if the story is coming from an organization that was just started 3 years ago versus one that has been well established and trusted for over 100 years, that has a reputation that's requiring them to make sure they get the facts right. If you don't care about your reputation, you can lie left and right. But if you care about your reputation, eventually that's going to catch up to you and hurt you. So seek out those sources. Another source I personally use, and there are others out there, but it's media bias fact check or media bias check, something like that, where you can go and search on news organizations, and they have a bunch of information about the quality of information coming from various news sources. They rate it where they are on the political spectrum. They rate, the quality and correct information in their stories. They, discuss whether or not they give opinion and present it as if it's news. you know, and that's honestly a huge problem, especially with, some of these politically charged sources of information. They present opinion as news or mixed in with news. So it's hard for someone who isn't, you know, critically thinking about each and everything that they hear or see or read, um, and wondering, is this really news or is this an opinion dressed up as news? And unfortunately, there's too much opinion dressed up as news. And that is frequently a source of incorrect information.
Mhm.
Does that answer your question?
Uh, So, first of all, this has been very interesting. The thing that I find most difficult now is finding information on local races, not the national races that are in the news all the time. And in part, I know that that's due to the loss of news organizations in small markets, even in fairly large, quote, small markets. How do you counter that, and how do you try to find out that information? Even going to the candidates' websites, frequently there's almost no information there. And heaven forbid that you're voting for a judge, there's almost guaranteed to be no information about what kinds of cases they've looked at, what their voting record is. So that's kind of my question.
Sure. So, I mean, that is a really tough problem. As you pointed out, it's in part due to the loss of local media. Um, you know, but if you're willing to put in the effort, there's ways that you can do it. Um, you know, I've found that most local candidates, if you want to speak to them, they want to speak to you. Um, so you can ask them questions. Uh, you know, the positions that they're running for, especially in off-year races, every single voter counts, and they will go out of their way to provide you with information that will make you want to vote for them. That may not be the whole picture, though. So, depending upon what the case is, you may have to search out public records. So, talking about the case, with a judge, you can uh, find summaries of their legal things. You can get public records about, you know, how long they've been on the bench, uh, what their cases have been, or maybe they haven't been a judge before, they've been a prosecutor or a defending attorney, or some other type of position. And unfortunately, it's now falls onto uh, the shoulders of the individuals to find out that information. And this is where, the idea of building up civics education is really important, because it's through that that people engage as a local physical community. Getting people involved in civic activities is something that's critically needed, because if that occurs, instead of going online and being siloed and hearing what's in the echo chamber that you know the that you're put into by various different algorithms, um, you you know we have to reestablish those local ties so that there is that local communication. Um, there's some organizations that try to provide that local news. There's Patch. Um, in Arlington here we have ARLnow.com and some of the other things. But again, that local element is really missing. And that may be something that is a role for not-for-profits now to step in, especially with uh, providing information about candidates, you know, to collect that information, to do that research, to make it publicly available.
Great, that sounds wonderful. Sydney, you have a question. Go ahead, please.
This is an instance of the kind of information that I now have and don't know what to do with. I
Sure.
have heard that there's a sort of an umbrella radio station called Cumulus that owns lots of other radio stations. Among them is WMAL, which is local here. And Cumulus has finally given into the idea that Dominion voting machines were not corrupted. And so they issued a denial in there, and they told all their local radio stations to issue this denial that they had sort of seen the light about Dominion. And WMAL, the last time I understand, as the last time I checked, has so far not done that. I mean, some of it has, they have commentaries that still go on that say, well, you have to be wary of these Dominion things. They don't exactly say that there's something wrong with the machine, but they'll say, well, there are doubts. And all you need to say something like, well, there are doubts. And then people just say, well, there are doubts, and then they'll just close the door. How would you, if you were, I'm speaking as an ordinary citizen with this information, what do I do? Write to WMAL or, I suppose that's a possibility. What would be a good way to approach that?
Yeah, I mean, that may be the thing that you have to do. It may be also going to their competitors and making sure that their competitors are getting the right information, because these news sources are for profit. And if their competitors are doing something that's attracting listeners, in the case of a radio station, they're going to want to do it just to be competitive. So making sure that the truth is out there via multiple means can sort of force the hand. In this particular case, the Election Integrity Initiative, the Bald Eagle Project, published a 47-page paper researching, in part, one of the issues you researched was bias in Dominion voting machines. And, so there's a well-regarded study using data-driven techniques to look at this question. We went into it saying, let's assume that it's true. How do we prove that? What sort of experiments or analysis of the data we could do? So we randomly picked 600 jurisdictions. About half of them had Dominion machines, and half of them had other vendors' voting systems. And we looked at how far to the left or right the votes were between 2016 and 2020 in each individual jurisdiction, depending upon what type of machine they had. It turns out that there was a slight but statistically insignificant signal that the Dominion machines actually favored Republicans, not Democrats. It's really the margin of error, so you really can't say that. But out of the 600 and whatever jurisdictions that we looked at, there was a slight bias towards Republicans on those machines. But when you factor in, the statistical margins of error, there was no bias in any machine. And this is something that's relatively easy to check for yourself if you're willing to go and collect the data. And you can do it in Excel or Google Sheets or you could use a calculator if you really wanted to and add it up on paper. But you can test for bias. It's very easy. That's one of the easiest things to test. It's much harder to test for some of these subtle things where it's like, well, what if there are ballots being discarded? how do you prove that true or false?
Mhm, okay, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Great, thank you. Frida, do you have a question?
Yes. Oh, good. And I didn't squeal this time. Yay. Um, yes, I'm so grateful for the work that you're doing. It is so important. Um, the concerns I have is my parents watch Fox News all the time, and the election, I was really encouraging, just vote once, and they always do absentee. I was like, just take it in and drop it off, and they did do that. But then, there are places like in Florida where there's that post office worker that could see those ballots that were sitting in the post office that weren't being processed, and how the news focuses on that. And just, it's really hard right now with this undermining of confidence in facts and science. And then, these true stories where you can see like the attack on our post office and our postal service. So I don't know if you have any answers to that, but I just wanted to say how what you're doing is so important. Do you have any advice to us as far as how we can help inform voters or give them confidence in the system?
So probably the easiest way to do it is to show them examples of the types of things that election officials do when there are problems to make sure everybody gets the opportunity to vote. And so I'm going to go to an example in Butler County, Pennsylvania. This was one of the cases we researched as part of the Bald Eagle project. We don't know why, but the election officials are fighting back and forth with the post office, or at least last time that I checked, as to whose fault it was that absentee or vote by mail ballots didn't arrive at a significant percentage of people's homes. Well, as soon as the election people discovered this, and we discovered this via monitoring the return rate, and we saw that Butler County was way below the return rate of all the counties in Pennsylvania. But they worked with local sheriff's office. They went out to people's houses to make sure that they got a ballot. They made sure that that ballot could be returned without having to use the post office. They would either come out and collect it, or provide drop boxes or whatnot. And when you realize that because of an actual error, election officials working in conjunction with their sheriff's department went door to door, okay, to make sure people had a ballot and could vote. And that sort of dedication is what really is the heart of our election officials. The election officials' job is to make sure that the results are accurately counted, and that everyone that's eligible to vote has the ability to vote. And they take that job very, very seriously. And I don't think that there can be any body that has worked as the chief election official in their jurisdiction that really would ignore that responsibility. And there are a number of well-publicized, well-known election officials that talk about that. Here in Virginia, Brenda Carrera of the City of Falls Church. I've been on panels with her. I've talked at presentations with her. I've seen her present on a number of things, and the dedication that she has in her role as the chief election official in the city of Fairfax. You know, people are people, and you have to, you know, either believe that, you know, the majority of people are good, or you can believe that, you know, there's some big conspiracy theory and people are trying to undermine uh, our elections for some reason. But it's you know, it's the problem of the public's faith in democratic institutions having been eroded over years. And you mix that in with misinformation and disinformation, and people like, I don't like government, so if the government's doing something, you know, that sounds corrupt, I'll believe that just because I don't like it. You know, it's another example of confirmation bias. But honestly, I've never met an election official who didn't take that job very seriously. Um, you know, there was something that came through on the chat. I just saw, yeah, the election official's job to explain dis and misinformation to voters, and that's, you know, something we built into the Squint anti-misinformation program. Was we realized from day one the customers that we had were election officials, and our goal was to get information into the hands of election officials about misinformation, information about misinformation, so that they could act upon it rapidly. You know, we were able, in some cases, to turn it around in 6 hours. And, you know, the election officials took action, whether it was local election officials or state election officials. I can't tell you the number of secretaries of state that thanked us for the work that we were doing, because we were providing data that they could use to refute this incorrect information, to show why it was false. You know, and so our job really was to support the election officials at all levels of government.
Wow, that's Mr. Schneider, this has just been a wonderful talk. We're coming to a close now, but I really appreciate you giving us your time this Sunday afternoon where you could be out doing other things. So we very much appreciate your time and just your insights into this process, because we're all struggling with this and how to address this, you know, as the league, as a nonpartisan organization, how to best respond to this problem. So I'm gonna right now I'm gonna turn it over to our president, Deb Wade. Thank you.
Excuse me. This is Ophelia Watley from Southampton Roads. I thought this session was going to go to 2:30.
No.
Oh, thank you.
Yep.
That is what the book says.
So again, Mr. Schneider, thank you so much for your expertise. And obviously from the questions, we really enjoyed your presentation and hope that we can continue to work together, that you're always invited back to share your wisdom and experience with us. So thank you so much.
Thank you. And I really appreciate everything the league does. You know, I think you're a great organization, and you know, my family and I have been to some presentations that the league's done here in Arlington. And so really want to thank you as well.
Thank you. So is there any other business that needs to come before the board? Then seeing none, the convention stands in adjournment sine die. Have a great weekend and thank you all so much for your contributions.
And thank you, Deb Wake and Joan Port, for being such awesome leaders of the convention and awesome leaders of our state board.
Yes,
Thank you.
enjoyed it.
Yes, yes,
Yeah,
yes.
thanks for everybody who helped. It was a team effort.
Thank you to Judy Eli.
I have a question. Sorry, I wasn't able to mute in time. Were we going to vote on the DEI policy? Or did I miss that? Or did I misunderstand?
We didn't, there's no need to vote on that because it was a national policy. LWV-US already did it, and we have to conform our bylaws to them automatically. So procedurally, there's no need for a vote because we have to do it. National did it, we had to follow. So there's no need to vote because you couldn't vote against it. You had to do it.
Thank you again for a very nice convention and informative, and I met some beautiful people virtually, of course.
Maybe next time we can do it.
Yes, welcome to Williamsburg. We look forward to receiving you. I know Sudi has done a great job already.
Sudi's great. Sudi's
Thanks,
great.
everybody. It was wonderful. Yeah, I enjoyed it.
Yay, Sudi, thank you, Pat. There are a lot
Oh,
of
darn, Sudi heard me say that. Darn it. Bye-bye all.
Bye-bye.
Everybody.
See you all.
Bye-bye.
Judy.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
All right.